Hello! Today we'll be talking about the Broken Empire trilogy. For me, this was a bit of a mixed bag. Certainly not a perfect set of books, but one with a well-crafted story to tell, so let's get into it. So let's start with The Prince of Thorns. This is an interesting book with engaging characters and a dark world where nobody is good. And it's a fun change of pace for your protagonist to be just the worst. I mean, he's a homicidal child with a sword leading a homicidal group of bandits, and that's who we get to follow. Mark Lawrence did a fantastic job of portraying just how awful a person Jorg and his group are and making the reader want to know where their journey goes, because it was pretty clear to me that this is the kind of book where not many people make it to the end alive. There is something the author did that I found to be a minor annoyance. That would be the flashbacks. But they're not overdone with only 8 of the 49 chapters being in the past. Those of you that have read the series, you know why I point that out. For those of you that don't, we'll get into it. But back to the book, the flashbacks are important, even if not to my taste, and they give the reader a more fleshed out view of Jorg. Overall, this was an interesting book, and even if the author wrote in a way that wasn't always to my taste, I ended up enjoying it. However, let's talk about the follow-up, The King of Thorns. I felt this was subpar to the original. And part of this has to do with Mr. Lawrence doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down on the flashback shtick. 27 of the 49 chapters were 4 years earlier. A phrase you get infuriatingly familiar with because that's the name of every one of those chapters. Which means that over half of the book is a flashback occurring just after the events of the first book, with the entire rest of the book taking place in a single day. Of course, we do get to know the characters that survived the book a bit better, and we learn just how far our society has regressed in this post-apocalyptic medieval fantasy. And things like royal incest and marrying children are once again commonplace. I wish I was joking, but a large part of the book is Jorg, now 18, marrying a 12-year-old child who I believe is also his cousin. At least he refers to his new father-in-law as uncle at one point. Aside from that, it's much the same. Everyone is still just awful human beings, and we get the feeling that we're along for the ride for the sake of the ride, not the destination. And that leads us to An Emperor of Thorns, the third and final book in the trilogy. This book somehow felt both better and worse, because we learned that the formerly 12-year-old wife of Jorg is now 14 and very pregnant. It's been 2 years since the end of the last book, and our piece of crap protagonist that we thought we finally found a moral line for, as he refused to consummate his marriage to a 12-year-old, seems to have changed his mind with a 14-year-old.
No, God!
The flashbacks were toned back, with 20 of the 52 chapters occurring 5 years earlier this time, so a bit less than half the book once again takes place between the events of book 1 and 2. And this means there was enough material in flashbacks occurring all within a year of each other between books 1 and 2 to make up an entire book on its own. Why Mark Lawrence did it this way is beyond me, but I found it endlessly frustrating to be jumping back and forward in time. On the other hand, the pacing feels much better than the last. We see more than a single day in the present, and we get a new perspective to follow. I am a big fan of following more than one perspective. It allows the reader to have a change of pace and see things from other sides, and I found it refreshing. And through her side, we're given more hints and teases for the reader to pick out. Ending Chad here, I'd just like to interject here and take a moment to talk about these threads that Mark Lawrence is putting together, because he spends so much time giving you these little nuggets of information throughout all three books for the reader to pick up and piece together, to notice that the world is more complicated than we're being led to believe in the normal narrative. And it's just fantastic when authors do this. They just give their readers a nice sense of accomplishment because we're able to see and pick out these little things that just are so fun to find. Okay, so back to your regularly scheduled program. I don't have much more to say on that other than it was a nice change of pace. Finally, this book felt like it was gathering all those seemingly loose ends that had been given to us throughout all three books, and suddenly we had before us a tapestry, and an ending that managed to be both predictable and surprising. I'm not going to talk about the ending beyond that because it would ruin it for you, but it's a good ending, and it was well done. So if you want to find out what it was, you'll just have to read those books for yourself. In the end, I'm glad that I read the series. Mark Lawrence's writing style and how he formatted the book were not to my liking, but the story he told and the way everything concluded more than made up for my frustrations with him in those departments. And I would happily recommend anyone interested in reading this book to do so long as they understand what they're getting into. So if you liked this video, please give it a like. If you didn't, a dislike. And if you have any books you'd like me to discuss, please tell me in the comment section. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.